In the spring of 2010, um, the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded.
Right, tragically killing 11 workers.
Yeah, and dumping literally millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. It was just a catastrophic environmental disaster.
Absolutely devastating, yeah.
But if you dig into the policy analysis of that event, the most shocking part wasn't just like the mechanical failure of a blowout preventer.
No, it was the regulatory side of things.
Exactly. The federal agency in charge of regulating offshore drilling was essentially, well, functioning on autopilot.
They were totally blind to the risks they were supposed to be managing.
Right. The system didn't just fail. It was exposed as completely inadequate for the reality it was operating in.
And that exposure, I mean, that's often what it takes to actually change how our world is governed.
Yeah.
We tend to look at policies, rules, government agencies as these permanent, static structures.
Like they're just carved in stone.
Right. But they're actually living, breathing, and frankly, deeply flawed life cycles.
And that life cycle is exactly what we're exploring in today's deep dive. We have this massive stack of academic texts, case studies, policy analysis documents in front of us.
It's a lot of material.
It really is. And our mission is to decode the hidden mechanics of decision-making. We're going to unpack how policies are actually adopted from a sea of alternatives.
How organizations attempt to, monitor if those policies are even working.
Right, and what happens when a system violently fractures. Plus, why it is notoriously difficult to officially kill a bad rule once it's in place.
That's a huge one.
Yeah, so whether you are leading a corporate team, analyzing government regulations, or, I don't know, just trying to understand why your homeowners association makes such baffling choices.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Well, this deep dive is your cheat sheet to the architecture of decisions. So let's just start at the very beginning, the blueprint phase.
The menu of ideas.
Yeah. Before a policy exists, decision makers are usually staring at a giant menu of competing solutions. How do they actually pick one without just getting totally paralyzed by all the options?
Well, the theoretical ideal is that they use a specific set of evaluative criteria to systematically compare every single option.
Okay.
Our sources basically outline 4 main pillars that every potential policy is supposed to be weighed against.
And those are?
Effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and political feasibility.
Got it.
So effectiveness is straightforward enough. It just asks, does this policy actually achieve the intended goal based on projected outcomes?
Right. But then the second one, efficiency, that sounds a bit loaded to me. Like, does that just mean picking the absolute cheapest option?
Not at all. I mean, in policy analysis, efficiency is really about maximizing what the literature calls net social welfare.
Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
It's a rigorous cost-benefit analysis where you try to assign a value to everything. So you aren't just looking at the direct financial cost.
You're looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. You're looking at indirect costs, intangible benefits, environmental impacts, public health. You want the highest overall benefit for the resources you're putting in.
Makes sense. But that brings us to the third pillar, which is equity. And that asks a much more, difficult normative question.
Yeah, because maximizing overall benefit doesn't actually mean everyone benefits equally.
Right. Equity asks if the distribution of those costs and benefits is fair. Like, you might have a highly efficient policy that creates massive economic growth.
But if all the benefits go to the top 1%...
Right, and the middle class bears all the tax burden, then it totally fails the equity test.
Spot on. And finally, you have political feasibility.
Which is the reality check.
Yeah. Even if a policy is effective, efficient, and equitable, can it actually survive the political meat grinder? Can it get the necessary votes and get adopted?
The sources highlight a great real-world example of this balancing act. It's regarding the 2011 and 2012 surge in gas prices.
Oh, the fuel efficiency standards.
Exactly. The Obama administration and major automakers struck this massive deal to push corporate average fuel economy, or CAFE standards, up to 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025.
It was a huge shift.
It was, and you can really see the mechanics of those 4 pillars churning there. They had to weigh the massive economic costs to the auto industry against, well, the national security benefits of relying less on foreign oil.
Right, and the environmental benefits of reduced emissions.
Yeah, and obviously the political reality of what the public was demanding at the pump right then.
That fuel efficiency standard is basically a textbook example of a highly visible policy shift based on rational, comprehensive analysis.
Right.
But yeah, the sources are very quick to point out a harsh reality here.
Which is,
Most decision-making does not look like that at all.
right.
Analyzing every single alternative is incredibly expensive, and it's time-consuming. So when dealing with massive uncertainty, policymakers usually rely on a process called incrementalism.
Okay, I want to pause on that for a second because the word incrementalism gets thrown around a lot. What does it actually look like in practice?
Basically, it means making small, pragmatic tweaks to existing policies rather than doing these sweeping overhauls.
So just baby steps.
Exactly. Decision makers look at the status quo and they just adjust it slightly at the margins.
Why do they prefer that?
Well, it reduces risk, it lowers the immediate financial cost, and frankly, it's just much easier to build a political consensus around a tiny tweak than a radical new framework.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, I mean, taking safe baby steps sounds really practical on paper. But if we're only making tiny tweaks to the status quo, doesn't that inherently favor the people who already hold power?
Oh, absolutely. That is a major critique.
Right, because the highly organized groups who already benefit from the current system, they just keep winning, while the unorganized and underprivileged just get left behind.
Yeah.
It seems like a recipe for institutional paralysis.
And that critique is a huge focus in the literature. Incrementalism can be dangerously conservative. It severely limits innovation. It ignores radically better alternatives.
And it must be completely useless if you're facing a sudden crisis.
Exactly, because it assumes the current path is fundamentally correct. So, to solve this dilemma, sociologist Amitai Etzioni introduced a hybrid approach called mixed scanning.
Mixed scanning. The text uses an analogy of two different camera lenses for this, but looking at how it actually operates, to me it feels a lot more like a modern weather tracking system.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, you have a satellite in space constantly scanning the entire globe, right?
Huh?
That's the broad, high-level overview.
Right.
It doesn't look at every single cloud, but it watches for massive pressure drops. And when that satellite spots a hurricane forming, you don't just keep staring from space.
No, you have to go in.
Exactly. You deploy a team of storm chasers in a truck to zoom in on that exact location and gather deep, hyper-specific rational data so you can actually act.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. Mixed scanning balances the depth of rational analysis with the practicality of incrementalism.
You aren't wasting your limited resources doing a deep dive into every single square inch of the sky.
Right, but by keeping that satellite active, you aren't ignoring the big picture either. The sources point out that the Council of Economic Advisors operates exactly this way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they maintain a broad scan of the national macroeconomy, and when they spot a critical failure or some emerging threat, they switch to the zoom lens to formulate targeted policy recommendations.
And the goal of that scanning is to prevent something the text calls administrative drift, which, I mean, just visualizing it is a terrifying concept for a massive bureaucracy.
It really is.
It's an organization slowly floating off course, making tiny incremental adjustments to the steering wheel, completely unaware that they are drifting toward a waterfall because nobody is looking at the horizon.
Exactly. Which brings us to a really critical pivot point in the policy life cycle. Adopting a policy, whether it's through incremental tweaks or a major mixed scanning overhaul, that's only the first step.
Right. It doesn't end there.
No. Once a policy is implemented, it starts interacting with a constantly changing real world.
So how do organizations avoid flying blind once the policy is out in the wild?
They rely on continuous monitoring and feedback loops.
Okay, so the feedback loop essentially connects the monitoring of the policy, the data reporting, and the evaluation so the organization can adjust in real time.
Right. But the sources go much deeper than just, collecting data. They introduce Chris Argyris' theory of organizational learning.
Which totally reframes what it means to actually learn from that feedback.
Yes. So Argyris argues that all organizational learning is about detecting and correcting errors. But the mechanism of how you correct the error, that changes everything.
Right. He breaks it down into single loop learning and double loop learning.
Exactly. And the classic analogy he uses is a thermostat.
Walk us through the thermostat mechanism, because this is where the theory really clicked into place for me.
Okay, so think of single loop learning as a basic programmable thermostat. You set it to 68 degrees.
Okay.
When the room temperature drops to 65, the thermostat detects the error, it turns on the heat, and brings it back to 68.
It fixed the problem.
Right. It corrects the error, but it never questions its underlying programming. It just maintains the existing routine.
Let me put this in like daily life terms for a second.
Yeah.
Say someone listening manages a marketing team.
Yeah.
Single loop learning is running a digital ad, seeing that the click-through rate is low, and just tweaking the headline to get the clicks back up.
Exactly. You fix the immediate metric.
Yeah, but you never stop to ask, wait, is this ad campaign actually serving our long-term brand strategy?
That is a perfect translation. Double loop learning is when the thermostat suddenly stops and asks, wait, why am I set to 68 degrees?
Is this actually the ideal temperature for the people in this room right now?
Exactly. It requires the organization to question and modify its underlying assumptions, its norms, and its core decision-making processes.
So single loop is fixing a mistake within the rules, and double loop is questioning the rules that created the mistake in the first place.
Yes. And double loop learning is what enables true innovation and adaptation. But Argyris points out a massive hurdle here.
The gap.
Yeah, he identifies a gap between an organization's espoused theory,
Which is their official mission statement, like what the leadership loudly claims they value.
right, versus their theory in use, which is the unspoken set of rules that actually dictates how people behave when the pressure is on.
The text gives us this really fascinating look at how you actually bridge that gap with the alpha case.
Oh, yes, the workforce safety training study.
Yeah. So for years, the company used passive learning, essentially lecturing employees on safety rules and telling them to wear their hard hats.
Classic single loop behavior. It just reinforces the existing rules.
Right. But then they shifted to simulation-based training and peer reflection.
And by putting workers into simulations, they forced active problem solving.
The employees had to evaluate not just what to do, but why their safety culture was failing in the first place.
They had to confront their theory in use. And that shift from passive absorption to active reflection, I mean, that is the engine of double loop learning.
Right.
You see an even higher stakes version of this in emergency management, specifically hurricane response.
How so?
Well, the multi-tiered feedback loops between local responders, state agencies, and federal actors, they require real-time continuous monitoring. They can't just follow a static binder of rules.
They have to constantly question their resource allocation based on what the ground data is telling them right in that moment.
Exactly.
So practically speaking, if double loop learning is the key to innovation and basically surviving in a complex world, why do the sources explicitly state that organizations actively create systems that inhibit it?
Well, because double loop learning is inherently threatening. Think about what it actually demands.
Admitting you were wrong.
More than that, it challenges the theory and use that senior leadership has built their entire careers on.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It forces individuals to admit that not only was their execution wrong, but their foundational assumptions were flawed from the very start.
Nobody wants to do that.
No. Institutions are built by humans, and humans naturally prefer the comfort of a single-loop tweak over the professional vulnerability of a double-loop overhaul.
But, I mean, burying your head in the sand doesn't stop the world from changing.
It definitely doesn't.
When that internal monitoring fails, or when an organization stubbornly refuses to look at its underlying assumptions, the pressure just builds.
Until the system fractures publicly.
Exactly. And that brings us to the most abrupt, chaotic form of policy change, the crisis.
A crisis is a brutal teacher. The academic literature defines crises as low-probability events with highly consequential outcomes.
Right.
But the most crucial detail here is that they are perceptual and socially constructed.
Okay, wait. What does that mean in practice, socially constructed? Because a hurricane isn't socially constructed, it's a physical storm.
Right, the physical storm is the event.
Okay.
The crisis is the sudden, horrifying realization by the public that the levees were poorly engineered, or that the evacuation plan was a total fiction.
I see.
A crisis violates stakeholder expectations so severely that it strips away the organization's espoused theory and exposes the broken theory in use for everyone to see.
And the text outlines a really specific progression for this. A crisis event occurs, which violently raises public awareness.
Yes.
Then stakeholders in the media start debating causes and demanding solutions, which elevates the event into an issue.
Right. And if that issue sustains enough attention, it forces open what analysts call a policy window.
Which is this rare moment where major legislative or organizational change is actually possible.
Exactly. And how wide that window opens depends entirely on the severity of the crisis.
The sources categorize them into 4 distinct levels.
Yes. First, you have bed rest, which generates some media attention but has a highly manageable impact.
Okay.
Then, medication requiring a definitive response and minor operational tweaks. Then, chronic, which involves major, prolonged reputational damage and intense external scrutiny.
And finally, fatal.
Right. A crisis so severe it literally threatens the survival of the organization.
Which brings us right back to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill we started with. The sources categorize that as a fatal and chronic crisis.
Yeah, it wasn't just the worst offshore spill in U.S. history. The sheer scale of the failure revealed that the regulatory agency had a massive conflict of interest.
They were in charge of maximizing drilling revenue while simultaneously enforcing safety.
Exactly. So when the rig exploded, that foundational flaw was exposed.
And the crisis forced a complete reorganization and splitting up of that federal agency.
And that mechanism of change is vital to understand because while public outrage and media agenda setting are massive drivers, a primary catalyst for actual policy change during a crisis is the perceived loss of organizational control.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. A crisis essentially forces an organization to undergo double-loop learning against its will.
Yes, the external panic kicks in the door because the internal feedback loops failed to do their job.
It is basically forced evolution through trauma.
Exactly.
So we've seen policies born from careful mix scanning, and we've seen them born from the panic of a fatal crisis. But eventually, some policies just outlive their usefulness. They stop working.
They do.
Which brings us to our final topic today, policy termination. And based on our sources, officially killing a policy is arguably much harder than creating one.
Oh, it is notoriously difficult, but we need to be precise about the definition here. Policy termination is the deliberate conclusion or cessation of a specific policy, program, or organization.
So it implies a full stop, not a single loop reform, not a budget trim, stopping.
Stopping completely. And it is incredibly rare because the roadblocks are massive.
Yeah, the text lists several roadblocks. Like, policies are highly interconnected, so pulling one thread can unravel a dozen other programs.
Bureaucracies are also incredibly adept at dynamic adaptation. I mean, they will literally shape-shift their mission just to survive.
But the most formidable roadblock seems to be what the sources call anti-termination coalitions.
Right. Anti-termination coalitions are hyper-mobilized pressure groups.
Okay.
Whenever a government function or a specific policy's life is threatened, the clients and bureaucrats who benefit from it immediately organize to protect their turf.
And they fight back hard.
Very hard. They will use every legal barrier available. They'll file lawsuits claiming that termination denies basic rights, intentionally dragging the process out in the courts.
Just to make it too politically and financially expensive to kill the policy.
Exactly.
But the roadblock that perfectly connects everything we've talked about today is intellectual reluctance. This is the ego and the sunk costs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
People's professional identities get completely tied up in their theory and use.
Yes. The sunk costs are not just financial. If you are the architect of a major policy, admitting it needs to be terminated is an admission of fundamental failure.
And that intellectual reluctance just paralyzes decision makers.
Which explains the mechanics behind one of the most fascinating parts of the text for me.
Yeah.
There is a list by a scholar named Robert Ben outlining hints for successful policy termination.
Right, his survival guide for terminators.
Yeah. He says you have to focus entirely on the policy's harm, enlarge the constituency of people who want it gone, and whatever you do, avoid compromise.
Yes.
But two hints really stand out. First, he says, don't float trial balloons. Why is that so critical?
Well, because of those anti-termination coalitions we just talked about. If you leak a rumor to the press that you're thinking about killing a program just to test the waters, you give those pressure groups time to mobilize.
To lawyer up and launch a counteroffensive.
Exactly. Termination requires decisive, sudden action.
And his other major hint is, recruit an outsider as administrator or terminator.
Which makes perfect sense.
It tracks perfectly. Because if an insider's ego and intellectual reluctance are the main roadblocks, you have to bring in an outsider who has zero emotional attachment to the old system.
Right. They didn't build the thermostat, so they don't care if it gets thrown in the trash.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is when you look at the broader theoretical perspectives on termination, it almost always relies on severe external shocks.
Like what?
Well, to actually overcome the legal barriers and the anti-termination coalitions, you usually need massive financial turbulence or a radical ideological shift in the government.
Wow.
And you have to ruthlessly avoid compromise. Because in the realm of termination, a compromise usually just puts the bad policy on life support, allowing it to incrementally survive,
So it's all or nothing.
pretty much.
Well, today, we have really mapped out the hidden life cycle of the rules that govern us. We've seen how policies are born from a messy, pragmatic mix of rational cost-benefit analysis and, incremental baby steps.
We've learned that the most resilient organizations survive by using double-loop learning to bravely question their own foundational assumptions.
Right. And we've seen how crises violently force change when that internal learning is blocked. And finally, we've discovered exactly why pulling the plug on a failing system requires an outsider's perspective and a strategic refusal to compromise.
Understanding these mechanics, it gives you a completely different lens. You stop just reacting to the rules and you start seeing the underlying theories in use and the feedback loops that created them.
And that matters to you because you are navigating these loops every single day. Whether you're trying to implement a new strategy at work, engaging in local community decisions, or honestly, just trying to understand the news cycle.
Absolutely.
Recognizing whether an organization is just mindlessly tweaking the thermostat or actually questioning the temperature, it changes how you interact with them entirely.
It's empowering.
It is. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over based on all this source material. Think about the biggest, most complex system or organization that you rely on right now.
Okay.
If a fatal crisis were to hit it tomorrow, would their hidden theory and use be exposed as completely contradictory to their espoused theory?
Mhm.
And if that system is fundamentally broken, what anti-termination coalitions are currently working in the shadows to keep that crumbling house standing?
It is a really profound question to ask of any institution we trust.
Keep questioning the blueprint. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.